Welcome back to Writing the West podcast, where we interview some of the top names in Western writing today. I'm your host, Tyler Offhammer with Cowboys and Indians magazine. Today, we're glad to welcome back one of the defining voices in Western fiction today, #1 New York Times bestselling author C.J. Box. And this is a special episode, our February-March issue of Cowboys and Indians, which goes on sale January 13th, features an exclusive preview of his upcoming Joe Pickett novel, The Crossroads, which arrives February 24th. The book opens with one of the most shocking moments in the series, Joe Pickett fighting for his life, while his wife and daughter scramble to uncover what happened. CJ joins us to talk about The Crossroads, the Pickett family, the 26th book, and the real West that continues to inspire his stories. CJ, welcome back to Writing the West.
Well, thank you very much for having me back. It's good to talk to you again.
Great. So you've been busy, obviously, in the time since we last spoke. What are you doing today? Are you writing, traveling? Are you spending a lot of time outdoors?
Well, right now, it's December in Wyoming, so I'm not out doing much other than my office is located on the top of our horse barn. So I walk back and forth every day and kick through the snow to get here today.
That's great. That's great. Beautiful country, I'm sure.
It is. It is. It's gorgeous, and it's a good time of year for the wildlife. If
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
seeing, every day, I don't know whether I'll see pronghorn antelope or deer or elk on our place, and that's always fun.
Well, and that begs the question. Last time we spoke, you shared a lot about Wyoming and the way that it inspires your storytelling. Since the 25th book and now into the 26th book with The Crossroads, what stayed constant for you creatively, and what's changed? Anything that's inspired you differently this time?
This time I really wanted to take a different kind of path with the books. In the past, Joe Pickett has a family. He has three daughters, his wife, Mary Beth. And I've always sort of focused on one of the family members in each book, or at least included them. And I thought it was time and something I wanted to do, and that was to bring them all together, the daughters together in this book, and have them be the drivers of the action as opposed to Joe Pickett. So it's a totally different tack with this kind of book and with my series in particular.
Well, and I will say, especially with our February March issue preview that we get at the Crossroads, it does still open with Joe, but Joe is in a little different scenario than we usually find him. His pickups is riddled with bullet holes. He's fighting for his life, and it's such a different mode to put Joe in such a vulnerable position. What led you to want to start with that for the Crossroads?
Um, Part of it was just the motivation of how do we get the girls to come together from their three independent adult lives now, um, other than a Thanksgiving holiday. And the one thing that would make them come together and does make them come together is that when Joe is found injured, and he's airlifted to a hospital in Montana and put into a coma, a drug-induced coma. So he is kind of out of the picture. And the three daughters decide that they're going to try to figure out if they can solve the crime and figure out who targeted their father. So wholly different thing. Even Mary Beth is pretty much out of the picture, and because she's in the hospital for the entire book.
Did you always know it would open that way, or is that something that evolved as you started writing?
It's something I've been thinking about for a few years now. Is that a very traumatic kind of injury to our protagonist, which not only is he going to make it, and then the added feature is if he makes it, is he going to be the same person? Because a brain injury often alters someone's personality and traits. And I was able to, I had read a book just prior to starting this one called Gray Matters by a neurosurgeon named Theodore Schwartz. And it was fascinating, and he has some stories in there of personality changes and that kind of thing. And I was able to consult with him as I wrote this book to make sure I got those things right, and to include them.
Wow, wow, interesting. I'm excited to see where that goes. And like you said, this investigation kind of falls to the daughters and obviously Mary Beth in a certain way. And Fans obviously get so attached to these supporting characters when you've done 26 books. And, what excited you about shifting a lot of that narrative away from Joe and on to his wife and daughters?
Two things. One was the structure of the book is kind of complex. I hopefully it's not the kind of thing where a reader will be confused or anything. I don't think so at all. But in building it, it was complex in that the three daughters. The book is threes. So I should have called it the Book of Threes. The Joe is found at a crossroads that leads the roads lead to three different ranches, and he was obviously headed to one of them when he was ambushed. So the suspects, there's three suspect ranches, with very crazy characters on each one. All of them have motive. Then there's the three daughters as well. And they decide that to investigate this, they're going to split up with each daughter going to a different ranch simultaneously. So nobody can tip off anyone else. So they conduct their investigations in their own way. Their personalities are different. They ask different questions. They observe different things. So while they're doing that, there's some flashbacks to Joe Pickett leading up to the ambush.
Wow.
And so the girls discover the bad guy and he discovers the bad guy at the same time.
Wow, wow. And last time we spoke, you talked about how your own family has some influence, obviously, in some of these characters. And how much did you return to the well of your own life in trying to put yourself in the mindset of these daughters?
Well, if you've got daughters, that means you do a lot of listening. Sometimes
That's right.
not too much talking. So I did draw back on when all three daughters were still at home and their personality and their interactions. But the three daughters in the books are not my three daughters.
Right.
I take different traits from all of them. All three of my daughters think that Sheridan, the oldest daughter, is based on them. you know so I was able to use that in the interaction stuff and the sometimes the wrestling and the fighting and that kind of thing, and that was fun to write. I really enjoy writing about the family.
Well, and what's most exciting too, if you have daughters, is obviously when all three are together. Is there a point in this book where we get to see that in action?
Absolutely, right off
Yeah.
the bat,
Oh, great.
they all converge at the family home, even though Joe and Mary Beth are not there, and that's where they start plotting out how they're going to do their own investigation. And then they split up, and then they reunite to share notes, and each of them are convinced that the ranchers that they talked to did it.
Right. Well, and I couldn't help but wonder, especially in the opening of this book, which our readers will get to see an exclusive excerpt from. With the title of the book being The Crossroads, obviously, like you said, Joe's found at these literal crossroads. But how much of that did you try to play into the thematic side, whether it be a crossroads for Joe, his family?
Well, I certainly kept that in mind.
Yeah.
The whole crossroads idea, I mean, is Joe going to cross over in this book?
Right.
And what's going to happen? I kept that in mind, but I never think about, you know, big themes like that. And, I'm trying to say this, and I just write the book.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you go through that craft of writing the story, is there a point in time where you say this is going to be a good Joe Pickett novel, or maybe it needs to be a standalone or an entirely different project?
That's usually at the very beginning. I've
Okay.
never gotten into a book at length and said this can't be a Joe Pickett book. I
Yeah.
usually that I my process is always to start with the issues or the plot devices first, research them, and then do an outline. So the books I've written that are not in the Joe Pickett, it was obvious because of the subject matter or the place that they would not be a Joe Pickett book.
Well, and as you just alluded to, we've talked extensively before about your process and in terms of that central issue, often a real world issue in your area, the research, obviously the outlining. How did that process play out for the Crossroads?
A little bit differently because, again, back to the Book of Threes, there are three different devices, each associated with a ranch, on why they may want to have shot up Joe Pickett.
Right.
And each of those are real world themes or plots, things that are happening, right now in the West.
Right.
And so in a sense, it's three books too.
Yeah. And I was gonna ask too, you're so involved with your fans and out on book tour, and do you see that result of what you're putting in your stories as these real world issues? And do fans notice that, and do they appreciate that you're bringing light to a lot of these issues?
They certainly do. I mean, and I love that kind of feedback.
Yeah.
It always amazes me when I write about something in an issue or something that's I think kind of obscure or very local to find out that same issue is happening in other parts of the country or outside of the country, even maybe with different creatures or different subject, but basically the same thing.
Wow.
Uh, I try to write about kind of tip of the spear, cutting edge issues in all of the books, and find how they apply all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and one thing that really interests me too about these long-running series like Joe Pickett or Longmire or the Tony Hillerman series is about aging your characters. How do 25 years in, how do you keep these characters going? And Joe ages, albeit slowly, and his daughters obviously evolve in their own ways. How do you balance that with your storytelling?
I start out every book figuring out, is this a year from the last one, 3 months, 4 months? So I do a little sheet of all the characters, their ages, and where they were in the last book and where they are now. Most of the books have been annual, a year,
Yeah,
fall to fall, because
yeah,
that's when hunting seasons are. And Joe Pickett's a game warden.
right.
But some of them are just, a few months from the last one. So I kind of plot out the characters' lives, where they're at. Is the youngest one still in college, that kind of stuff, and then go from there. And it does keeps the series fresh for me, because obviously not only Joe and Mary Beth, but the girls are now all doing their own things too. And
Mhm.
that makes it interesting for me to make that little change up each time.
Right, right. Well, and as you mentioned too, with these real world issues from energy and land use, crypto mines, we talked about
Right.
before. What are you seeing in terms of the Mountain West and your area in Wyoming, just in terms of how people are dealing with these? How important is storytelling, like what you're doing and some of the other authors? And we've even seen this come to light with like some of these new TV series that are coming out. What have you seen as the impact from some of these forms of entertainment?
In a state like mine, and I'd say the entire Mountain West, is now, I mean, it's happening pretty fast. Influx of new residents, new population, people moving from other places, but also kind of a gold rush going on when it comes to like rare earth
Hmm.
minerals and mining and discoveries. And also the energy sector has ramped back up. Whereas for years it was kind of in the doldrums. So it is very much a go-go place now, and it's happened pretty quickly. The big difference for us, also data centers.
Yeah.
They're being built in places that are cold, like Wyoming,
Right.
because the biggest issue with those is keeping them cool.
Right.
So that is a huge, huge data centers going in. So it's sort of changing the whole economic landscape and cultural landscape to some degree.
Do you ever feel any sort of pressure to write about any issues, or is it mostly for you about what's going to tell that story the best?
I don't feel pressure. No.
Yeah.
It is more about what's gonna, I usually start with the issue and then build the story around it.
Right.
And then the way I always think about it is, um, okay, let's just say data centers. How
Right.
can I pull a reader through this issue in a page-turning way that's
Right.
not just about building a data center?
Right.
So I start with that and then build through it.
Well, and one thing that, is going to hit readers, especially after chapter one is, we're not only are we looking at this through the lens of different characters, but each of them are a little bit different, in terms of their moral complexity, their
Right.
skills. Joe, he's stubborn, but he's got this such a sense of integrity. And How much of that was a challenge for you in writing this story from these characters' perspectives?
It wasn't that much of a challenge because those traits have been, especially with the daughters, have been explored and expanded throughout the series. This is kind of the culmination of all of that.
Mm,
Yeah, we know who they are. They're just more so in
yeah,
this one. And the youngest daughter kind of flowers in this book because, like I think real family dynamics, the older kids tend to think of the baby of the family as always being the baby of the family who will never mature. And the older daughters in this book see the youngest one actually come into her own.
yeah, yeah. And after finishing the Crossroads, any thoughts on potentially branching out with the daughters or Mary Beth or anything, or are you strictly a Joe Pickett author?
Well, I don't know if I like that idea. What I like to do instead is just turn over some books to other characters with
Mm,
Joe in the background to some degree, and I've
right.
been doing that for years. Sometimes Nate Romanowski steps up to be the main driver. Sometimes it's Mary Beth. Sometimes it's one of the girls. This is the first time it's been all three.
Right, right. Well, and what I found so interesting as you talked about the three crossroads here with three daughters, each of them kind of put in their own unique scenario here. How did you match the girls, and without giving anything away, with these different families that all have kind of a reason to target Joe in some way?
That's actually a decision made by the daughters.
Oh, okay.
They, uh, the crazy sisters who run one ranch, they're going to send April, the craziest of the three daughters, who
Fight
packs a
fire with fire,
pistol.
right?
That's right. The more cerebral one and mysterious one goes to the oldest daughter, Sheridan,
Okay.
and the sophisticated out of state landowners who like to travel internationally go to the youngest one because she's just returned from a study abroad program. So
Mhm.
they decide which ones they think will work best.
Wow, interesting. Interesting. And I'm sure this opened up such a Pandora's box for you to explore some other parts of these characters, which I'm sure throughout the years fans have clamored for or asked questions about. And how much do you enjoy that kind of almost fact finding or characterization for these different characters?
Well, I love it. I mean, that's the heart of every book is the characters and their
Yep.
motivations and where they go. Um, I don't ever want to say the plot's not important because, of course, it is. It's the driver. But I like the idea of people coming away with the books having knowing more about the characters than they did going in and thinking about that's what the book is about.
Right, right. And going back to the pressure idea, because I think that in another way, it's just great expectations, obviously, from fans who have come to know and love your series. Um, did you ever worry for a second about, uh-oh, I'm not putting Joe Pickett front and center, and how will fans react to that?
A little bit, I think about those things,
Yeah,
but at the same time, I know I'm going to write another book.
right.
This will be resolved.
Okay. So
Uh,
fans don't need to worry.
that they don't need, like, for example, the current book, the one I'm writing right now, as opposed to the Crossroads, which will soon to come out. I thought it's this one we will isolate Joe
Hmm,
in a different part of the state where it's all Joe.
right.
So that's kind of the remedy for people who might think that.
That's right. That's right. Well, and even from your last book, which we mentioned, and obviously with the Crossroads, a ton of new readers or new fans, I guess, have found Joe through obviously the streaming of the Joe Pickett series that was out. And we've talked at length about that before and how it's
Hmm.
helped to build that audience for your series. Um, how has that series influenced, if at all, how you go about writing future books?
The TV series,
Yes.
I have to say, not at all.
Yeah.
Just like, I mean, I think they did a good job with the casting and they certainly drew on the earlier books in the seasons of them, but those books were already done, and I never think of actors when I'm writing
Yeah.
ever. and never have, never will. It's just a totally different thing. Totally, it's the entertainment business is very collaborative. Um, whole different structure is it's so different from me just sitting on top of my barn working on a book as opposed to being in the middle of a bunch of people all running around with lights and microphones and all of that. So I don't let that affect me in any way.
Yeah. Well, and I think as your fans have seen, you can pack so much more into your books. Have you had fans that came and told you, I came from the TV series and I found your books? And what's the reaction been?
Absolutely. That's one thing I think I give I give people a lot more credit, I think, than sometimes they do in entertainment. Um, People will, what I have found, yes, the answer is yes. There's always probably 20% of every crowd that comes to a book signing now found the books through either Big Sky on ABC or Joe
Right.
Pickett. They
Right.
started with that, and then they thought, where does this come from? What's the source material? So they seek it out. And I don't know how many times the last couple of years I've talked to people who saw the series and have read all of the books to
Yeah.
date because
Wow.
of that. And even if the series and even if like some of the episodes are goofy,
Yeah.
there's always a little kernel of something in there that will interest somebody enough to try to figure out where what was the source material, and they'll go find the books.
Well, and I'm sure they're overjoyed to know there's even more coming, more
Yes, well, I
stories.
hope so.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I wanted to talk for a second since we're on fans. Any thoughts or plans for a book tour after the Crossroads is released?
Yep, it's being put together right now. It'll be nationwide.
Great.
Uh, and last year's tour was unbelievable to me because there were several venues where there were over 1,500 people to come
Wow.
to a book signing. I couldn't believe it. In fact, some of the crowds were just limited by the space that they had.
Wow.
So I'm kind of guessing that's going to be the case this year. And then um, later in March, then I'll go after the book tour itself. I'll go to the Tucson Festival of Books,
Right.
which is a great one for me because there's so many Westerners and Western readers that go to that.
Yeah, yeah, and that begs the point, not only through this podcast, but I'm sure through your book tours and all of these book festivals, it's amazing to me how much new content is being put out about the West by Western authors, and all of them
Hmm.
so different. What are some of the things you're reading? What are some of the things you're seeing in Western literature that give you hope that books aren't dead yet?
Well, I think the biggest change I've seen over the last maybe 10 years or so, I think it used to be that if the book was set in the West, whether it was contemporary or historical, it was pigeonholed into like a Western category. It
Right,
wasn't considered a real book.
right.
Whereas I think they've now it's just simply a location within the mainstream,
Yeah,
and the books are treated that way, and that's a
yeah,
great thing because when
yeah.
I first started out, that was the very first agent I ever had thought I had to write more, Western.
Yeah,
They needed to be modern day retellings of classic Westerns, where now the Western part of it is simply the setting and the
right.
culture, and it's not set off to itself
Yeah.
aside.
Well, we recently spoke to Louis L'Amour's son, Bo, and he even talked about in the 70s, his father was trying to shirk the Western genre because it had become almost inundated with copycats,
Right.
and it had become a dirty word in the publishing
Hmm.
industry. And like you mentioned, I think that Western has almost taken on this new genre itself of being set in the West and not necessarily being what you expect when you open the story. And how much
Hmm.
of that as an author has freed you up to explore new topics and ideas?
Um, I think to answer that, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wrote some of the standalones that are not
Mm,
in the Joe Pickett series,
right,
was to kind of go outside of the Joe Pickett universe and set them in different places and have different subjects. But I've never felt constrained. Luckily, the books have been successful. That
right.
success means everything in
Yeah,
publishing.
yeah.
And if the books are successful, you can do whatever you want.
Right. And I always love to talk about how when your name gets bigger than the title on the book cover,
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
you've done a good job.
And I'm lucky that my name is so short, so it can be very
Right.
big.
That's right. That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
Mine wouldn't fit on there.
Your
No.
name would it would have to be yeah, it'd have to be a big book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, working on it. Right, right. Now, without spoiling anything, and I know we don't really know what happens or how Joe changes in the Crossroads. Does this mark a directional shift at all? And what can we expect as we move forward in the series?
Well, one of the things I've tried to do and I continue to do, and it will happen here, is I do try to address real. I mean, some series the protagonist gets shot 5 times, and the next book it's not even mentioned.
Right,
He's just fine. There will be some after effects,
right, right.
and I'm writing that book now, but I don't want to give away what they are.
Yeah, no, of course not. You got to come back to the podcast
Hmm.
to give us those details. And speaking of, so book 27, you mentioned it a couple of times. Doesn't seem like you've taken too much of a breather between 26 and 27. How do you balance, leaving one project, going to another, but also with book tours, book festivals, and obviously, I'm sure you've got a family who'd like to see you
Yeah,
between all of that.
grandkids are great.
Grandkids, congratulations.
I mean, I am pretty disciplined as a writer. I try to get most of the book, if not all of it, done during the winter months when I'm home, when there's not a lot to do outside, so that I can take the summers off
Yeah.
somewhat to fish and golf and do other grandkid things, and then dive back into it as the weather starts to turn. That's my work pattern.
Yeah. Have you encountered recently any sort of block or anything that, and if you did, how do you overcome that?
I have never had writer's block.
Okay.
I kind of don't believe in it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you power your way through. Just like, I always think, does a plumber have plumber's block? They just don't feel like going to work that day. They probably don't. Yeah, there's days, but they have to
Yeah.
go. So
Yeah.
that's what you do.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Well, and you mentioned also your standalone novels. We know you're working on the next Joe series book. Are there any other non-Pickett projects simmering and like I know to revisit maybe Cassie or other characters as you've done before?
I'm about halfway through I don't want to say young adult novel, but a novel for like 12 to 14-year-old kids about the West, about the Mountain
Wow.
Man era.
Okay.
This It's a passion project. I don't even know if I'll ever finish it or if it'll be published, but I'm really enjoying it. I had to set it aside to then dive into the next
Yeah.
Joe Pickett book.
So no block, it's just a time issue
Right.
trying to get through
Exactly
all of
right.
these. Well,
Exactly
and,
right.
and I think that's a great generation. I'm a former teacher myself, high school. That 12 to 15, 16 is such a vital time to either give up reading altogether or to start a lifelong passion. How many young people have you seen at your fan engagement events, and why is that age an important age for you for that book?
Well, I see a number of them.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: there were a couple of big articles last year, one in the Wall Street Journal, one in the New York Times, about the fact that young men don't read anymore. They spend all their time on screens. They're not
Mm,
reading.
right.
And the exception to that in both articles was they reached out to me because the publishers and other people said, his demographic includes a large contingent of younger men.
Wow.
It's true.
Yeah.
Fishing guides, hunting guides, outdoor guides, they're
Right.
listening to the books, maybe not
Okay. Yeah.
reading them
Right.
page by page, but that's true. And I see them at every signing, which says to me, men will read if they can find something that they like
Yeah.
that isn't, the standard thing in the bookshelf. And I think boys will read just like I did if they can
Yeah.
find things that
Yeah.
appeal to them. So
Right.
this kind of what I'm thinking about with this other book.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of Gary Paulson, in his series of Hatchet stories and
Yes, right.
yeah, where they can really see themselves in those stories. Um,
Yeah.
and you mentioned a passion project. What about that has been a passion for you with that Mountain Man
I've
series?
always been fascinated with that era.
Yeah.
And I've read, I can't say I've read every book, but every book I could ever find about that era, I've really gotten into. Um, and part of it because most of it takes place where I live
Your
now.
backyard. Yeah. Yeah.
But also just that era is not explored that heavily in fiction.
Right. I think we saw The Revenant had
Hmm.
its shining star and then, nothing again. And I'm sure that's also a hard genre. It's kind of like the traditional Western. It had its heyday and now it's a little more difficult. Has that played into it at all for you?
Not so much because I've
Okay.
always wanted to do this.
Right, right.
And like I said, I don't even know if I'll finish it, but I'm enjoying the first half.
That's right. Well, in the meantime, there's a few others we could read until we get your version. So just to close, when readers finish the Crossroads, what feeling do you hope stays with them until book 27?
Without doing any spoilers, I think that the feeling I want is that they've they know a lot more about Joe Pickett's family and the
Mm,
daughters than they ever did before. Because now they're three very fully realized independent women with very interesting stories of their own.
right. And that's something we've seen again and again here in the last few years in Western fiction, and we're eager to see how the Pickett girls react to a situation like this. And again, we will have an exclusive preview of the first chapter of the Crossroads in our February-March issue of Cowboys and Indians, which goes on sale January 13th. And I'm sure most people will be eager to pick up the full version of the book when it comes out on February 24th. You said you've got a book tour coming out pretty soon after that in March. And in the meantime, where can folks pre-order the book and where can they find more info about your tour dates when those are
Well, I mean,
released?
the books they can be pre-ordered, of course, on all the Amazon and all the online places now, and then yeah, it'll be February 23rd will be the debut.
23rd. Thank
Yep,
you for
yep.
that. Thank you for that. And for your tour dates, where can we find those? Do you have a website people can visit?
cjbox.net. They will all be
Perfect.
on there.
Perfect, perfect. Well, CJ, thank you so much again. I mean, we could talk about your books forever, and we will when you get back from book tour and we're on to number 27. But in the meantime, we'll have to wait and enjoy the Crossroads. Thanks for having us.
And thank you and kudos to you and to Cowboys and Indian for featuring some fiction in a magazine.
Of course.
Hasn't been done
What
in a
year is
while.
it?
Great. Yes, that's great.
I love it. Well, we're eager to have it. Be sure you guys look for that on newsstands and obviously get your pre order for the book in the meantime. Thanks for having us, CJ.
Thank you.
Take care.